We are so grateful to you for joining us on this very important conversation on Human Rights Day, which is the finale of the 16 Days of Activism against Gender-Based Violence. The 16 Days campaign was started by activists at the inaugural Women's Global Leadership Institute in 1991, and it's spearheaded each year by the Center for Women's Leadership Institute the Center for Women's Global Leadership at Rutgers University. Tonight, we have the honor of speaking with two remarkable leaders about the lived experience of Black transgender women and to explore that experience in the context of gender-based violence. Our advocacy chair, Laura Stevens, thoughtfully noted that every identity carries a vulnerability for lessened humanity, and in turn, greater exposure to violence and inequalities. We seek to create a space for this critical discussion that recognizes the factors that connect women of all identities. And tonight we will look for opportunities for self-reflection, tools for growth, and actions that we can take. I want to particularly thank the team who organized this event, including Advocacy Chair Laura Stevens, Programming Chair Arzu Sirjani, and led by Marketing Chair Meisha Williams Bertels, who envisioned this series and who will moderate tonight. Meisha is an experienced digital strategist who founded Phase One Strategy to help entrepreneurs and businesses build their brands. A seasoned entrepreneur, she previously built Chef's Table NYC, a niche catering and events company. Meisha, thank you for diving into the work of our chapter and for bringing this series to life with such passion, vision, and gusto. And now we are deeply honored to introduce our speakers. Meisha, if you would take it away.
Thank you, Stephanie. I am thankful that as marketing chair of UN Women USA New York, that my colleagues Laura and Arzu and I were given the space to create the Black and Women in America series. This series is to foster honest and raw conversations, and tonight is definitely no exception. 2020 has been one impactful year for the world, suffering a global pandemic, and for Americans coming to the reality that we have far to go to heal as a nation. Transgender people, and particularly Black and Latina transgender women, are marginalized and stigmatized in our country. They face violence every day, and in many cases, they fear turning to the police for help. It is as if they are suffering a pandemic within a pandemic. Let's get this much needed conversation started. Tonight, I am thrilled to have two women who are on the front lines every day. These multi-talented women personify what it means to not be complacent, but to stand tall and lift their voices to motivate people to see that everything is not fair and balanced. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the evening, Tori Cooper and Aryah Lester. Tori Cooper is a health and equity consultant, community organizer, educator, published author, and leader in the transgender and HIV communities, and recently honored as one of the most influential LGBTQ Georgians by Out Georgia in 2020. She leads with more than 30 years of experience at all levels of HIV service, from volunteer positions to her position as executive director and founder of Advocates for Better Care Atlanta, LLC. She now serves as the Human Rights Campaign's Director of Community Engagement for the Transgender Justice Initiative. In this position, her focus includes economic empowerment, capacity building programs.
Meisha, we need you to unmute.
Oh, have I been?
We lost you just for a second.
Oh, okay. Okay. My apologies. So I'm just going to
economic empowerment, I think was the last thing you said.
Thank you. Capacity building programs, public safety, and expanding public education campaigns. Tori Cooper. Next, we have Aryah Lester. Aryah Lester is a nationally awarded author, speaker, and educator who currently serves as Deputy Director of the Transgender Strategy Center. Ms. Lester founded the organization Trans Miami, as well as the organization, the National Alliance of Transgender Advocates and Leaders. She was the last standing two-term chair for the state of Florida Health Department's Transgender Work Group and former chair-elect of the Miami-Dade HIV/AIDS Partnership. Ms. Lester is an advisory board member of Unity Coalition and a board member of Equality Florida's Trans Action Florida Committee. Ms. Lester is a board chair of STAR, the nation's first transgender organization, initially founded by Sylvia Rivera and Meisha P. Johnson. Aryah consults with the Department of Justice and Homeland Security and has been inducted into the National Trans 100 list. Welcome, Tori and Aryah, and thank you for giving us your time this special evening. Let's start things off by getting to know you a little bit better. This question will be posed to both of you. Can you share some of your personal journeys which led you to take on your current roles to powerfully advocate for transgender rights? And as a follow-up, I want you to think about sharing, when did you have your aha moment that you are going to stand in your truth by standing up for others?
Well, you know what? If I can jump in, Tori and Meisha, what I really feel that an aha moment is for me in being a Black woman of trans experience was really more of a OS moment, you know, to be quite frank, of that realization that even through all the complaints that you've had and all the trials in life, that you've come to a moment where it was like, wow, I actually had some privilege because it just got stripped away from me as soon as I started transitioning. And that has been the push that really pushed me into activism and pushed me into advocacy, is realizing that even with my Blackness, my transness put me down a level lower than I ever even previously knew existed. And I think a lot of people in America are still unaware that that level exists, because it is like a hidden level, you know, and it's hidden through these governmental and cultural and traditional systems. And so I've had to navigate a lot of those systems and gone through a lot of turmoil. And it's that turmoil that really fueled me to use the talents and the resources and the energy that I have in order to just push and push and push until, you know, I'm here at a moment to, you know, be able to assist other people that are like me, that look like me, that have navigated like me, and that have suffered as I have.
Thank you. Tori?
I'm happy to chime in. I can't say that there's been one aha moment. Mm-hmm. I'd say so much of it has been a series of aha moments, culminating together, little teeny tiny pushes that, excuse me, allergies. Mm-hmm. Little pushes that together really just turned into this mountainous aha moment. Certainly some of the things that Aryah hit on. There is, we bring a lot of privilege into every space where we enter. I can say that for both Aryah and me. But even with that privilege, we're still Black, and we live in a country and navigate and work and thrive in a country where systemic racism is a problem. We're still women, where only 100 years ago, where some women, not even Black women or women of color, but where some women were just granted the right to vote, but still not Black women like us. And then I'm a Black trans woman, where we actually have, not going to get too political, but we actually have systems that would seek to erase our very, very existence. And so there's been a series, you know, for many years. I'm 50, so I might even be the oldest person on the call. and you know, Black don't crack, Meisha.
You look great. You look great.
Thank you very much. But there was a time when I could simply navigate life as a Black woman. And I started identifying myself very publicly as a Black trans woman as a political statement, to really, in a way, to say, in spite of all of the foolishness that you say about trans people, we still thrive. And to know that even with all of the privilege that I bring into a room, that Aryah brings into the room, and so many of our friends and co-workers and colleagues also bring into all of the spaces that we enter, that we still have to put up with the same crap as other trans women. And that's really, really important. So all of those are aha moments that have cultivated and brought us really to this very moment on today.
Thank you for providing our attendees a little more background about you ladies. We appreciate that. Let's transition to a disease that is still prevalent in our society, HIV/AIDS. The transgender, I think we have a slide coming up. The Transgender Law Center released the Positively Trans report back in 2018, where they assessed the needs of transgender non-conforming people living with HIV. Sorry about that, yes. And so if you see it, living with HIV across 3 communities, Detroit, New Orleans, and South Florida. And what sticks out to me is if you look at the first line item, over 50% African-American and over 50% Latinx felt as if they were treated unfairly at work due to their HIV status. And the last bullet point or line item, 81% equally for African-Americans and Latinx felt they were treated unfairly at work due to being transgender. To me, that speaks volumes. Now, Aryah, you wrote an article, I believe back in 2018-ish, I Live in the Basement, touching on the social system in America and referring to them as floors within the house. Can you tell us about that metaphor and what you want people to know?
We are hopefully
okay, there you go. Yes. Going from my introductory statement, I guess to get into a little bit more detail, I'm glad that this was framed with all those wonderful things in that bio, Meisha, that you wrote, because now I'm going to get into the not so pretty parts of my life, you know, and so. To start out with, after transitioning, you know, before transitioning, I was accepted into Harvard University. I was at a private university. I was studying psychology and computer science. All of my professors and teachers saw me as being either a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer. You know, there was success that they saw, even with my Blackness. But then, you know, there was always something missing, and so. That something missing erupted in mental issues that I had with depression and suicide. And when I was at college, it was a private college, but yet it was a private Christian college. And so the college decided to enroll me into therapy that was a form of conversion therapy to try to convert me from being, you know, to have me be non-trans or non-LGBTQ in any type of way, which culminated in my conditions worsening to the point that I had a very serious suicide attack, right? And after that, the private Christian college wanted to clean their hands of me. So they sent me to a private hospital. I got locked away for weeks, you know, and then it was like, let's not hear from Aryah anymore. You know, she doesn't go here anymore. And so that's just show the light of the disparities that you see sometimes with the percentages of, oh, trans people, only this certain percentage have bachelor's degrees, have master's degrees, that this is not reflective of their intellect and reflective of what they're capable of doing. This is reflective of the barriers that, you know, we have in our academic institutes. So moving forward from that, I started to realize of all these privileges that I never really realized I had being taken away, down to the point to where I could not visualize any form of success for myself beyond being a receptionist at some law firm or something at Wall Street. Never any higher in position than that. But even that was the epitome of success. And only a couple of people that I knew actually attained even that. And so I find myself, leaning back on working at a club, from the time that I was 19 as a stripper, and learning how to make profit off of my body and my labor. And after having all of these promises of success and all this, now I'm down to this type of life. But yet, somehow, somewhere, something told me to reach even further. And I started reaching. I started the organization in Miami. I got connected to the health department. I did so many things, but yet, an LGBTQ organization who didn't really care about trans people, they cut my salary just because, oh, that's enough. That's enough for her. She's trans, and then when I left the organization, blackballed me to where I could not get into any other organization. So here I am already an advocate in South Florida, already made some name for myself, even though of all those other things that happened to me. And yet I found myself homeless and found myself unemployed and collecting unemployment checks. And then, staying at a friend's house to where he wasn't supposed to have anyone living in a condo with him. It was a term of his lease. And it was at that apartment that, I came across this individual who caught my interest, but as soon as I walked through the door where he wanted to get to know me more of, I realized that it was a trap and it was an abandoned apartment. And at that time, as soon as the door closed, there was no way out except to negotiate and except to comply. And so therefore, in my Blackness and my womanness and my transness, I did. And that's when I acquired HIV. And that's why I said that it's the living in the basement, because I was in that situation, not from anything that I personally did, but from where that college put me at. So where my former employees put me at or fired me because I was trans, and even though I excelled in as far as I could get with what resources that I had, I still wasn't able to make a good living. Now I do. And so that's what fuels me to make a living for others that is like me.
Thank you, Aryah, for sharing a deeply, deeply personal story. And I hope that we all heard that message of the world is not fair and everybody deserves a fighting chance, and we have to believe in ourselves. Thank you for that. Tori, I would like to follow up with you. I recall seeing or reading somewhere where your coming out years were during a time where HIV/AIDS had a true stronghold over the LGBT community. Can you share what barriers still exist for Black trans women today as it pertains to healthcare and treatment? And maybe enlighten us on how that is different from region to region, nation to nation, and country to country.
So my first experience, thank you for that, Meisha. My first experience with HIV, the closest experience, I should say, was I was in middle school. So this would have been in the early 80s. And my grandfather died that morning. And my mother's father died that morning, and her cousin died that night. My grandfather died of cancer, but my mom's cousin died of AIDS-related disease. And I remember just maybe 2 or 3 weeks before that, the entire family had packed up in their cars, and those who could, they went to New York, and my mom and dad described having to wear these hazmat suits, like an astronaut. Just to go into the room and still not be able to touch him the way that they wanted to. And then 2 weeks later, he was dead. And this was a young man. And so that was my first contact, direct contact with HIV. And then I remember on the news where public officials were warning folks about the 4-H Club, homosexuals, hemophiliacs, heroin users, and Haitians. Je parle français parce que mon père est haïtien. And so that automatically brought it home also. And so there were so many close things. And all of this as a young kid, I'm learning about myself, new things every day, and having my first boyfriend and having a girlfriend and figuring out how I'm going to navigate life while there is this thing that exists that's coming to kill and destroy you and folks like you, is what the media was saying. And I remember conversations with my friends as I'm in high school and now getting my driver's license. And I remember my friends, many of whom are long gone because of HIV, and some of whom are still here. And I remember our HIV education, our HIV 101 was, don't have sex with white men and you won't get HIV. So by 1986, 87, I'd already had 5 or 6 years of miseducation around HIV. I said that long story to say that in all of the years since then, the 34 years since then, there's been a lot of other misinformation. There's been a lot of misinformation around Black people in HIV, around queer people in HIV. And unfortunately, there's been so very little information. I learned more from my friends in 1987 about HIV, probably about trans people in HIV, than I did for 30 more years. And I'm a CDC subject matter expert because there simply wasn't any research that was being done on my version of womanhood, on our version of womanhood. There was, they said, okay, so if you're a gay man, these are your rates of HIV infection. This is your risk. This is how you get it. This is how you're going to die. But there was nothing. There's very little information about Black women, period. And regardless as to womanhood. And so we see, even in 2020, there still is insufficient information. We know that people get HIV all kinds of ways, through the bodily fluids, through condomless sexual contact with a person who has HIV. But we also don't know how trans people, how medicines interact with hormonal therapy for those who choose hormonal therapy. We also do not know why that there are some research studies that if a trans woman's body has been altered, or a trans man or a non-binary person has altered their body in certain ways, that they can't participate in those trials. And so we know that the science of HIV is sorely lacking. The community aspect of disease prevention is sorely lacking. And yet there's still so much more misinformation. And so unfortunately, in the 35 years that HIV has been such an important part of the American landscape, that as women, as Black women, and as Black trans women, all of those intersectional identities and all of the intersectional identities that all of us have that are represented on this call, that there's not enough information, there's not enough research, there's not enough science, there's not enough data, et cetera, et cetera. There are very, very few community efforts. We're seeing some community mobilization, and we're seeing some of the major pharmaceutical companies only in the last 2 years put out marketing campaigns that were inclusive of folks who are like us. And if I may, before I turn the microphone back over to you, Meisha, I talk a lot about race. And I think it's important to talk about race. And it makes some people so uncomfortable to talk about race and racism. And I encourage every person who is listening, if talking about race makes you uncomfortable, I implore you to figure out why. Because we live, we exist, we operate, we navigate, we exist in a country for whom, out of the faces that I can see, I think I see 12 faces. And based on the little bit of background information I know about you all, there's essentially one person who I can see who was part of the building of this country and acknowledged in laws, who could own property, who was part of scientific research around HIV. Michael, I'm talking about you. But they're very, so we live in a country where race didn't matter unless you were white, really up until the last few years. So to not talk about race and systemic racism, I think we're doing a misjustice for every person, regardless as to your color. And that's part of the problem.
I agree. Thank you, Tori. And I hope everybody heard that too. And I encourage you, just like Tori, to ask your question, do you feel uncomfortable?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to apologize for not sharing the correct slide earlier. So I'm going to share that now just so everyone can see it.
And as you said, share that, I do want to say that allyship comes with discomfort. And if you're not, if you're completely comfortable, then that means you're not really an ally to whatever you're describing your allyship towards. In order to, and people are like, how can I help? How can I help? The only way that you can help is taking portions of your privilege and giving it up, which is sacrificial, which is going to hurt, which is going to make you uncomfortable. So, you know, that's a feeling that you should have.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that we do, it's not you know who you are when you're born. So I want to touch on our youth really quickly. Stephanie, we do have a slide from the Trevor Project. While she pulls that up, let's take a look at the youth. We all know growing up is not easy, but it's just heartbreaking that a person who has so much life to live feels so tortured that they would want to take their own life. In the slide, you'll see the Trevor Project released All Black Lives Matter, Mental Health of Black LGBTQ Youth. And in their findings, 44% of Black LGBTQ youth seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months, including 59% of Black transgender and non-binary youth. I think this is horrific. So I'm posing this to both of you, ladies. The stats show the particular burden of youth around suicide. What actions and initiatives are essential to changing these statistics?
Well, I think the first thing, and I guess I'll go because I just talked about my history with suicide, and it's because we need to realize that most of these numbers do not come specifically from someone who has thought that their life was worth nothing. These are coming from people who are constantly being told from the outside that their life is worth nothing, and therefore internalizing that. And that's why you see these high numbers. You know, my mother told me that, oh, when God's going to destroy you, and because you're wicked and you're living the life that you're living. And when that happens, me and your brothers and your family, we're all going to be happy and fine and move on without you and not miss you whatsoever, right? Well, so that brought my self-worth to a certain, you know, it was here, then it's there. And then, you know, you're seeing what's being pushed in our curriculum, you know, from K to 12, that doesn't have anything trans included in it, even though as a youth, you know, we realize our gender, we realize what kind of clothes that we feel comfortable in, or how we like to do our hair, or what our favorite colors are at a way early age. And all of these are kind of determinants as to our expression and how we express ourselves individually, which also comes with like some gender expression as well. We all go through that at a very, very early age, you know, just like we know if we're left-handed or right-handed and someone says, why are you right-handed? I don't know, it just is. And that's what being trans is, and being that is not in the schools. So then you have that other layer of like, okay, I'm not even seeing myself being represented, reflected. For a long time in media, all you saw was negative portrayals. So it was nothing. So then all of this is bringing down your self-worth to the point of like, suicide is logical, and it seems to make sense with what is being battered at you from all these different angles and ends, until you find other people like yourself and realize that you've been lied to your whole life. And most of us are being lied to in our whole lives. And most of our lives is figuring out who we are amongst all of the lies that we've been told. But yes, I'll pass it on to Tori.
Thank you.
So I'll respond to that question kind of briefly. Meisha, are you a girl or a boy?
A girl.
Okay. No, you're not. Are you, what are your pronouns?
Ooh, I would assume she, her, but I could be it. So.
Okay. You're wrong.
Okay.
You're wrong. I know. I see your face. I see you. What's this lady's in the purple? She's so animated. I love her. As a trans or non-binary person, what I just did to you is what the world does to us for many, many years. We're telling people who we are, and the world is telling us, no, you're not. But then you ask me in a different way, and I'm still telling you, and the world is saying, no, you're not. And so for trans youth, many of whom simply haven't developed coping skills, simply don't have a person who is affirming who they are. As Aryah said, sometimes suicide is the only way to get people to stop telling you no. You're not real. Because what I'm saying to you, when I discount who you are, when I discount your gender, when I dictate who you are versus you taking the lead in that, I'm saying that everything that you think is wrong. Everything that you think about yourself is wrong. Your experience, the way that you see the world is wrong. The way that you live and exist in the world is wrong.
And look how uncomfortable that you were, Meisha, to where you know what your pronouns are, but after that first question, you were unsure of your own pronouns after that, you know, and that unsurety and uncertainty, that's that self-doubt that then translates into self-worth once, you know, you get battered with it so many times.
Yes. And after I finished talking, I left a pregnant pause right there so that could just kind of emanate in the air for a little. Because you're right, Aryah, she didn't, this lady's a beautiful woman, physically beautiful, her spirit is beautiful, she speaks well, she's pretty for a dark-skinned girl, and only Black people would understand that.
Yes.
And so you got it all. But I'm telling you that who you tell me you are is wrong. And for many of us, we have heard that. And we hear from the people who matter most in our lives sometimes, which are our families. You know, as youth, all you have is your immediate family and a few friends. And if they're all telling you, or if just enough of them, or even just one who has a lot of influence in your life, is telling you that, no, you're not a girl. No, you're not a boy.
That's powerful. And it's shaking me to my core to even have that experience. I've never had that experience. I've had other types of experiences, but not to question, who do I think I am? So I thank you for that eye-opening experience. I really do. Wow. Now that I'm second guessing what I am, no, I'm kidding. I think, how about we go ahead and move on to the media, the wonderful media. So Aryah, as the media and public demand justice for the murders of Black cisgender men, 2020 is the deadliest year for transgender people since the federal government began tracking transphobic killings in 2013. A majority of those killed were Black and Latinx transgender women and femmes. How can we build an equal awareness and protest for the murders of Black trans women?
Well, I think that first we need to recognize why this is happening, some of those root causes. And like for me, the first time that I even knew anything that was related to trans was in talk shows in the 90s. It was Sally Jesse Raphael used to have this little thing where these women will come up and they'll go and they'll stand up and they're like, oh, well, which one's the man, type of thing, or this is a man. And then you had the Jerry Springer ones, and that's where you saw more of the people that were more like me, Black or brown, that just that whole standing there, that was more of the white ones, right? Then you have the Black and brown ones that were allowed to get beat up on stage because they tricked this certain individual, or, they tricked. And so first you have that, then you have preachers and religious institutions telling, like these people are going to hell, basically they're going to be destroyed. So then when you have those who may be attracted to us or intersect with us, they's hearing all of these things too, all that stuff that we told you that we internalize, also other people are being exposed to it. And the people that we end up being attached to romantically or sexually or friendship-wise, or even in passing in the streets or in the stores, it's a negative effect that automatically comes up from them because of some attraction or some interest, in our bodies or our presence or the way that we are presenting ourselves. And then society makes it okay. Like there's actually a defense, trans-panic defense that is usable in the court of law for you to kill somebody and then say, oh, I killed them because I didn't know they was trans. Now that they're trans, I killed them. Therefore, I can be free of this crime. And so if you're seeing that, like our government is putting a certain value, like, oh, yeah, well, you can kill these people. And, we're kind of looked the other way. And I personally saw them look the other way when, bodies of my friends were in trunks, dead bodies, and the killers were driving the bodies around in the strolls that we would frequent in Manhattan. And, we knew it and the police knew it, but they didn't care, because we were just trans, Black and brown trans people that had no value. And so that sense of no value is why in certain other instances, if you're in like some type of cis hetero relationship, may not come, when trials and turmoils and things come up, and being Black and brown, that it doesn't get to this violence of death, and all of that, but it does for us. And it does because of the oppression that we're getting, not only from, being trans in ourselves, but as a community, in the oppression that we're getting, and us getting this misinformation. It's all being controlled by entities outside of us. Not to get conspiracy theory in a sense, but yeah.
Thank you. Now, Tori, Ms. Tori, victim blaming persists and perpetuates under investigation of gender-based violence in the transgender community. Likewise, Black trans women are more likely to be imprisoned and wrongly convicted. What needs to change in the legal and criminal system to ensure accurate reporting?
So victim blaming has a long, long history here in this country. The fact that there were folks who came here to escape religious oppression, came here and oppressed folks who were already living on these lands, indigenous folks. And then they said it was their fault because they weren't cultured and they didn't eat the right foods and they didn't speak their languages. And then they brought over with them in the 1500s, not in the 1600s, here in the United States. I'm getting to the answer. And
time.
Is when it is widely regarded as the beginning of slavery. But in the mid to late 1500s, it's actually when very small groups of slaves were first brought over to the United States. Africans, they didn't refer to them as slaves then, were brought to this country to do manual labor in the 1500s. over 100 years preceding the official start of slavery. And so then the rule of law became, if a slave tries to escape, if an African tries to escape slavery, it's their fault. I had to beat him because he was disobedient. And so we have a history in this country of blaming the victim. That people who get HIV get it because they were doing something nasty or disgusting, when the truth is folks were either having sex, they were suffering from an addiction, they were born to one or two parents who had HIV or something similar. And so again, we have this, there's this thing of victim blaming that has, from the very beginning of the United States as we know it now, has always existed and permeated. And that if Black women were not so angry, then we would marry more. Victim blaming has always been the case. And so as trans women, people still fall for this ridiculous myth that we're out to trick people. So I'll offer this to you all. Mm-hmm. So if there is a person, let's say in this particular scenario, if there's a man who I'm interested in being with physically, sexually, emotionally, why would I want to trick him? If I want to have sex with him, then I want him to know what he's getting into because I want to know what he's getting into. And so the truth is, I'm going to tell him everything that he needs to know. But because people are socialized a certain way, he's afraid of what you are going to think about me and how he feels about me, as Aryah just said. And so that, again, we're blaming the victim. We're blaming this man for being trans attracted, or perhaps he's not attracted to all trans people, he just likes me. Mm-hmm. We blame people for being queer outwardly, because if we based it simply on people's sexual proclivities, then many of us have, those of us who attended college, particularly if you especially, I know many folks, I'm not discrediting in any way all male or all female colleges, but the opportunity is just there. If we could go all back through our mental Rolodexes and think about one or two, or maybe 6 or 7 or 23 of those evenings that we didn't want anybody to know about because we were just playing around and we were just college students, then we'd be judged by the same metrics. And so we played the oppression Olympics. And we beat up on people who we feel have less power in society. We victim shame, and all of that works against people like you, Aryah, and myself, and so many others. Because if you come to this, if you don't speak the Queen's English here in the United States, if you have any other accent other than British, Scottish, Scandinavian, Australian, or Kiwi, mm-hmm. You are considered less than. All immigrants didn't come here speaking Spanish as their first language. We allow cisgender heterosexual whiteness, white masculinity to dictate pretty much every system that we all have to navigate in society. The names how we identify ourselves. We didn't create the terms cisgender and transgender. You didn't, I didn't, and very few people on this call are part of that demographic. And yet we have to continue to live under these rules that were created by other people and fall victim to rules that weren't created truthfully with us in mind in the first place.
I think we all are getting an education tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I know, being respectful of the time, I know it's 7:20. I just want to remind anyone anyone who's attending, if you have a question for Tori or Aryah, please send them to Kelly. Let's continue, ladies. I want to transition over to allyship. I know we touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to pose this to both of you ladies. Many cisgender straight individuals consider themselves allies, yet unintentionally engage in harmful behavior. What can allies consider to do to better act in harmony with their intention? What can we do?
So before I fall out of my chair, this thing got me, because I'm a heterosexual, straight, strictly dickly Black woman. That's what it is.
Yes.
Just as straight as anyone else. And so, and in full disclosure, Meisha and I had this conversation earlier. So this is kind of a setup. But that's important to understand, because every trans person doesn't identify as heterosexual, straight, whatever. And as every cis person. Three things three things that all folks, regardless as to what your identity is in your lot in life, there are three things. Trans people in particular, one of the things that creates this division in public society, in a free capitalistic society, are access and opportunity. And so as an ally, regardless as to how you identify, it's incredibly important that you increase, for all marginalized folks, but for the purpose of this discussion, transgender women, increase access and opportunity. You may not be someone who should be standing in a line at an all Black Lives Matter march, or it's a Black Trans Lives Matter march. And if we could talk about that a little before we close.
Yes, we will.
That might not be your lot in life. Everybody at McDonald's doesn't do fries, and I think their fries are wonderful, but their milkshakes are pretty good too. So whatever your job is, do it well. Some people are better, Meisha, at writing checks than they are at a whole bunch of other things. All right. So if writing check is your gift to the world, then write checks and be very, very intentional with that. If you, as an agency or as an individual, are upgrading your computers, provide resources to trans organizations in your area, give away those computers. You know, it doesn't cost you anything. It might even save you some money in the long run. But those are resources that you can do, because you might not be someone who can write a check. And then my last point on this. So I say, because again, I talk a lot about race. If it bothers you, oh well. But white men created these two magical things that worked great for their nieces and nephews and daughters and sons who didn't have college educations or didn't have filled out resumes. And those two things were mentorships and internships. All right. Create mentorships and internships. Be very, very intentional about bringing in Black people and Black women and Black trans women. That's a opportunity, education, employment. Those are great equalizers. Okay.
You got it.
Yeah. Thank you. Aryah, do you have a follow-up?
Do all of that, but do it until it's uncomfortable, remember, because if not, then you haven't done enough.
Very true. I remember you sharing that with us a long time ago. Going back to Tori, touched on a little bit about Black Lives Matter. Let's dig into the question. Many social justice movements are founded and led by women who are Black, queer, or both, from Stonewall to Me Too to Black Lives Matter. These movements later tend to focus the narrative on the rights of one identity, such as the white gay man, the straight white cisgender woman, or the Black man, and facing violence and discrimination. How can we actively keep the rights of all represented in these powerful movements?
So the very first thing, so here's a little history, because I'm old, so I tell stories. That's how I answer questions.
You're not old, but go ahead.
In this country, the reason why it is so imperative that not only do we say Black Lives Matter and all Black Lives Matter and Black Trans Lives Matter, but we actually are intentional about doing work around that, is because in this country, what I believe is the best country in the world, let me say that the Constitution of this country didn't even consider anybody on here, I'm going to keep picking on you, Michael, other than Michael. And I'm just Michael and Mr. Bertels. And I'm just going off of visuals, but nobody else that's on this call were you considered in the Constitution, in the framework of this country. Nobody. As a matter of fact, there were even some things, there are a few things that were included that would actually discount our very existence.
Mm-hmm.
And this country now being, 400 years old, that only 1964, with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, was there then a legal document that was inclusive of Black people and people with disabilities and brown people and people for whom English was not their first language. Because people think the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was just about Black people and white. And so it's important to understand that if white men in this country, and I love white men, I've dated a couple of you, you're all right with me. White men in this country have had a 380-year advantage over everybody else. Then isn't it okay if we say Black lives matter and Indigenous lives matter and people who speak Spanish natively, their lives matter also?
Yes.
And I would add to that you also have to think about it as humans, not really as individuals, but as like large movements and large groups, we overcompensate. And let me just explain that out just for real quick. For the longest time, remember the little Mother Earth figures that, the first religions were based off of a mother figure, the fraternity figure, the maternal mother. That reigned for so long that then there was an explosion all of a sudden of paternalistic, religions. When you look at the way that we trace lineages back through mothers, and then all of a sudden, bam, we're still going through our last names of our fathers, and not of our mothers. And so then you also see, we saw polytheistic religions that then all of a sudden, bam, there was this huge influx of all this monotheistic religions, right? And so we're seeing this thing when movements happen because of being diminished or oppressed or not acknowledged, that when they burst open, they kind of overcompensate for what they didn't have. And being that all humans and, we all derive from Africa, and everything that we do and all our successes can be derived genealogically, looking at our genes and whatnot all the way to Africa. And so therefore you had this big influx of white superiority that's coming to a head now. And so all of the peoples that have been oppressed over that are overcompensating. And so white women are overcompensating, Black communities are overcompensating. And that overcompensation happens with the disacknowledgement of the other people that are with you, that are a part of that group, because we're focusing so much on how, the blinders of like, okay, we've lost, when it's not a we have lost, we've lost, and so I think that that's a bigger issue when we're just looking into the behavior of us as humans, and looking at the evolution of us as societies and as a species.
And one more quick thing.
Mm-hmm.
White men, you haven't lost anything. You've not lost anything as society. I think what we see, when we see that 72 million folks voted for the loser in the election, some of them were afraid that their whiteness and their cisgender heterosexualness was lost, because out of 46 presidents, one of them was half Black. He was also half white. That's the part people like to leave out, but it was half Black. But then, it took a white man to beat another white man in the office. The irony of that. And so we have to, I think, I don't want to coddle white men and I don't want to coddle whiteness, but we have to understand that there's some folks who feel that they're being left out. So if white men are feeling left out, then be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Thank you. I now would like to turn it over to Kelly, but before I do that, Tori and Aryah, thank you for being you and being so strong and powerful and representing and standing up for the many people who may not even know your name. So I thank you. I think I can speak for everyone tonight that we are grateful. Up next, we will have Kelly ask you a few questions from our attendees. And Kelly, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Meisha. And thank you, everyone. This is amazing. And I know we're pressed for time, so we really appreciate you answering some of the questions from the audience tonight. So the first question that we have up, and this is for both of you, Tori and Aryah, what are your thoughts on cultural sensitivity training when it comes to service providers? Should therapists have training on how to work with trans people prior to providing services to trans people?
Well, of course. I mean, that's like saying that, a person can be a doctor without any schooling, or work a restaurant grill without ever cooking before, and so it is necessary, but I think that we need to look out for cultural sensitivity trainings being the one and done type of thing. Like, oh, we got that as an organization, let's place that, okay, good to go. Now let's focus on those goals we was already focusing on. It needs to be something that is repetitive. It's something that because your staff changes, the people that you work with, your partners change, there's so many ways. And then the landscape is ever changing. The terminology is ever changing, and the different subsets of what it means to be trans is ever changing because it should, because that's the whole definition of it. And so, especially when you're looking at generational things, when you're looking at different policies that affect trans people and affect yourself as an employee or employer, these are all things that need to be taken into account that requires, a constant reflection and looking at making sure that your diversity and inclusion is not just on paper, but that it is organic and integrative and integrated within your everything that you do.
So I will very briefly add that I believe the term cultural sensitivity is bullshit. It is 2020. What I would prefer that we were training and talking about were cultural diversity, cultural appropriateness, because I don't want you to be sensitive about people who are different than you. I want you to be intentionally inclusive. And so when I hear terms like cultural sensitivity, I'm telling you, it drives me nuts if you can't tell. I think it's absolutely stupid. It is, and this is nothing to the, let me also say this. I pray that the person who submitted the questions, thank you for that. And I hope you don't take this personal, but I really believe because I bet you it wasn't a Black person that wrote that. I bet you it wasn't a trans person that wrote that. I bet you it wasn't. Because it is important to we don't want to be sensitive around people. We want to be intentionally inclusive to the point where we get where we just hire people and we don't. And the reason I keep talking about names and I keep calling out or calling into the conversation to folks who are male cisgender appearing is because we're still living in a point in our societies where people will look at your name on a piece of paper and say, oh, that's not going to be a good fit here. That cultural sensitivity is not going to change that. Cultural appropriateness will. Okay, that's it. That's it.
That's a good answer.
I love you.
Who are you talking to?
There's Jay Burton in purple. I love Jay Burton is the most animated person on here, and I'm secondly most animated. I love you.
I wish I could see this.
I know, I didn't see anything. All right, so another question, this kind of tags on to that question because we're getting a lot of positive feedback in the comments, but this piggybacks onto the last question, which is, if you find yourself in an organization that is lacking representation, where do you advise an individual begins their work? And how do they feel empowered to begin their work in that organization? And the second part of that question, is geared towards Aryah, and that what is it that the Transgender Strategy Center does to help make tailored solutions to do so?
So may I go first, Aryah, so you can?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I would suggest to every person who is the only to leverage your tokenism. Aryah and I were in a 2-day training. So we've been together for the last 48 hours. But I will certainly say leverage your tokenism. Because even if you personally don't feel like tokenism, when you're the first, there's something that goes along with that. And so the problem is if you're the first and you're always the first, or you're the first and while during your tenure, you're the only. So leverage your tokenism. If you, that means that when there's a job, if you work in marketing and there's a job opening in accounting, well, you know what, I have this friend who graduated from an amazing HBCU who is a CPA, and I think they'll be perfect for this position. So part of tokenism, leveraging that is making sure that you're bringing other people along. Otherwise, you're just a token. There you go, Aryah.
Thank you. And one thing when I talked about the changing landscapes, that changes of what type of protections that trans people have in certain places that maybe before the lackadaisical kind of view of the hiring and the retention of trans people, it's now changed, but your company doesn't know it. Look up and see what the current policies, are locally, what the human rights ordinances are, or HROs within your county or jurisdiction, and that's leverage that could be used, for a company. If you are the only person, then that means that there's issues, period. There's issues. If you're the only Black person, there's issues. If you're only woman, it's issues. If you're the only immigrant in the room, there's issues. Like all of these are issues and red flags, and so you already know that this entity has existed upon the models of a white male supremacist model in order, if this is the result of it being in existence for years. And so then there has to be a big change. And sometimes, we have to really be honest and know that sometimes the change is just switching the whole leadership out and putting Black and brown and trans and immigrant and non-able-bodied people up there at the top to then rewrite the script and make the decisions.
Thank you.
And the Transgender Strategy Center can be able to assist you if you are trans and if you are a transgender organization, or if your organization has some type of investment with the trans community, you can contact us through transgenderstrategy.org. We offer diversity and inclusion trainings. We offer a slew of faculty and consultants like Tori Cooper that is able to assist you and come in and able to help look at some of your HR policies and your onboarding and your programs and just your full out cultural respectability and at what level that is at. So, yes.
Thank you, Aryah. I want to jump in because I was going to say you got to finish that up with the Transgender Strategy Center. So good catch. I skipped this question and I really want to hear this answer before we end. What are the problems that keep you up at night, especially during these unprecedented times of a global pandemic? And what currently gives you the strength to continue to fight for justice?
It is alienation, and it's always been alienation that has kept me up since I was young, but of what forms of that alienation decides to embody as a demon to keep me up at night is different, and sometimes it's my Blackness and sometimes it's my transness, and sometimes it's my trauma and my burden, my psychological burden is that no matter how many successes and how many, accesses to privilege that I get, that you're still pulling that. If you're a woman, if you're Black, if you're brown, if you're LGBTQ, if you're not, specifically like a European descent, white, then you're carrying it too. And just realize that, it is heavy and will continue to be heavy until we find some type of liberation. We need to liberate ourselves, and it's not even like, oh, Black people need to liberate themselves from white people. Like we all need to be liberated from the traditional systems that are holding us back from being ourselves and for being true and real humans, because I think that we lost what it means to be us and to be humans because of all the other just inconveniences and ways that just make you lose sight of what your soul and what your spirit is telling you. So that is what I would say.
So I will say very briefly, the things that keep me up at night are racism, violence, racism, lack of national leadership, racism, phobia, and all of that encompasses that also, and transphobia, and then non-cis appearing phobia. And then last on my list would be racism, because it emanates out of every single system that we have to navigate. The fact that my zip code could make my credit score lower than somebody else's. That's systemic racism. The fact that you and I can live in a house the same size, that are literally 2 blocks away from each other, but because my neighborhood is predominantly Black or predominantly minority, that your house could be valued 60, 100,000, the exact same house built by the same builder, sold in the same year, even by the same realtor. So all of that is racism. And we don't always think about those things as being racist, especially if you're not a person who's on the negative end of that. But racism, it permeates all of the systems that we have to navigate, because we didn't create the systems and they weren't created for us. And so we have to create new systems to navigate that take racism out of the picture. But then there's still folks who feel like they're being left behind. And so we have to beat that bear down.
Yes, agreed. Ladies, Tori, Aryah, this has been a truly profound experience tonight. Take homes for me, and I hope everyone, is to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be uncomfortable, but acknowledge that and push through it and ask questions and be deliberate and be intentional. Right, Tori? And think about cultural appropriateness as opposed to insensitivity or sensitivities. Having said that, I want to share that we have created resources for you all to continue this conversation, so that all women and girls are seen and heard equally. In your chat, you have a link to our resource toolkit, which we will also email to you. This toolkit includes articles, books, even the article that Aryah we mentioned earlier at the top of the discussion, books, support services, and guides, so that we can drive home the power of allyship through action and support, and maybe a checkbook.
Exactly.
Thank you, Meisha.
Yeah. Before we depart, I would like to ask our panelists to share what book or podcast have they recently read or listened to that has inspired them or re-energized their life's work.
Well, a book that I always reread is just Lord of the Rings, all 3. Because just the themes of the impact that you can have as an individual, no matter how big or small that you are, that always resonates with me. And being someone who, hobbits were overlooked as a race within that book. And so, a trans person, I've been overlooked a lot too, but a hobbit ended up being the one to save the world. So, yes, that is what I would say.
Thank you. Who knew? Tori.
So here's a cliche answer, but it's truth. I love reading the Bible. I think it is a wonderful roadmap to living a better life for those of us who ascribe to spirituality. And I've already read it from cover to cover, but I'm actually rereading Becoming, because I've pre-ordered Barack Obama's book for some people, myself included. Yeah, you already have. There you go. Yes, Liza. But I think that's really, really important because it is a great example of a woman. You know, the president of the United States is considered the person that is the most powerful person in the world, and his wife is considered the most powerful woman in the world. And that as the most woman in the world, that she was still facing some of the same shit from people that you and I do about her hair, about her Blackness, about her body, about her lack of whiteness, about simply, now this is a woman who went to two of the biggest Ivy League schools in the country, and they say she doesn't talk right, or she doesn't walk right, or she doesn't have appropriate etiquette because she hugged the queen. And so I think that that's a story that all of us, regardless as to how you identify, can learn from that. And so there's some incredible life lessons. So I'm using that as a precursor to a prequel, if you will, to Barack Obama's book.
Well, thank you. I would like to say this has been, here again, very enlightening, and I'm very humbled and grateful for your time. Thank you to all our attendees. I would also like to have a special shout out to Arzu, who is our programming chair, and to Laura, who is our advocacy chair, and to our president, Stephanie, along with all the members on our working group. Kelly, thank you. I can't see everybody, but I just want to say thank you and know that we all appreciate all the hard work. And I, here again, thank you. But last, I would like to end with one last quote. And this is from Audre Lorde: "Without community, there is no liberation." So let's all rise up in our community. It takes a village, and we're not going to get there tomorrow, but we'll get there soon by us putting one step in front of the other. So thank you, each and every one of you, for your attendance tonight. Enjoy.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. Hi, everyone.
If whatever happens, we'll see you for part 2, right, Aryah?
Yes. Oh, yes, you did. That's right. Part 2. Aryah, she's like, I don't know what part 2 is, but
made it up. Girl.
Looking forward to it.
Somebody that's on this call texted me and said they
join me and we can create any part 2, transgenderstrategy.org. We can create a part 2 for
Perfect.
you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
much. Thank you,
Thank you all.
Meisha. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Aryah. Bye.